Now, meet the man in the black shirt. Donovan Brown is a partner program manager in the Azure CTO incubations team at Microsoft. Before joining Microsoft, Donovan spent 7 years as a process consultant and a certified Scrum Master. Cloud methods and practices are his thing. Donovan has traveled the globe helping companies in the US, Canada, India, Germany, and the UK develop solutions using agile practices. Visual Studio and Team Foundation serve in industries as broad as communications, healthcare, energy, and financial services. What else keeps the wheels spinning on the man in the black shirt? Donovan's also an avid programmer, often finding ways to integrate software into his other hobbies and activities, one of which is professional air hockey, where he was ranked number 11 in the world. Speaking on the topic of digital transformations, Donovan will share his experience and insights into moving workloads to the cloud, exploring IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, and containerization, and share invaluable lessons from Microsoft transformation journey. Please join me in a round of applause and welcome Donovan.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I don't have a presentation. I just wanted to come and share some insights and thoughts that I've had over the years. Willie invited me to come and I was like, so what do you actually want me to talk about? He says, all the stuff that you've been talking about now that you're at Microsoft. You might know me if you obviously are big into DevOps. I am the guy who defined DevOps for Microsoft. So that definition from Microsoft came from me. That's how Willie and I kind of got to know each other. We kind of bonded over that. But as was just stated, you have to reinvent yourself over time. Not that I've actually tried to distance myself from that DevOps brand that I built, but now that I'm over in incubations, I'm doing a lot more cloud native development. I'm doing a lot of digital transformation and helping a lot of our customers make that transition from the on-prem VM world into that world that lives inside of the cloud. What I find is that it's imperative that we do that. And the reason why is because all of your competition, all of your customers' competition, they're already doing that. And I would just as in Budapest, I can't say who I was visiting, but you can probably put together the airline that I was there to go hang out with. And I'd already visited them years ago. And I remember telling them, they were all excited, Donovan's coming, he's going to talk to us about DevOps. And I had to remind them that every one of your competitors is also a customer at Microsoft. And you're the last airline I'm talking to. And now you can just see the fear come over their faces. You're like, yeah, like I've already talked to every one of your competitors about DevOps, about the transformation, about how important it is. So they're all ahead of you already. So you need to realize that implementing DevOps is not something that you have the option to do. You either implement it or you lose. And the same thing is starting to happen with that digital transformation. You either start to utilize the cloud so that you can scale and have the reliability that is required of your customers, or your competition will, and you're going to lose that customer. What we learned really hard is that losing a customer, man, you almost never get them back because they're to the point where they will try every competitor that you have before they give you a second chance. So keeping the customers you have is so much easier than regaining a customer that you lost. And digital transformation is a key way of doing that. Some fallacies that I see in digital transformation is people assuming that to go to the cloud means I have to containerize my application. And I can't tell you how much trouble this causes a lot of customers who aren't ready for Docker, who aren't ready for Kubernetes, but just need to get out of their data center. And there's so many ways to get out of your current data center and start utilizing PaaS, SaaS, IaaS. And you can use a combination of those things as well. You don't have to pick just one of those things. You don't have to lift and shift from your data center into IaaS, which are basically just VMs running inside of someone else's cloud, and just sit there. But it's a quick way to get you out of where you are and into the cloud so you can start using some of the reliability things. You can start to scale to sizes you wouldn't be able to host inside of your own data center. It gives you some flexibility immediately if you simply were to just move your VMs from where you have them today into a hyper cloud like AWS or Azure or GCP. And what I tell all of our customers to do is, please, whatever you do, after you've lifted and shifted your application from the VMs you had on-prem to the VMs that are now running in the cloud, do not get comfortable there. And it's a really comfortable place to be because you understand everything. It's just a VM. It's just someone else's VM. So I still have to patch it. I still have to reboot it. I can still RDP inside of it. I can just get that warm and fuzzy feeling that you get just knowing you're on a VM, a machine that I can control. But with that comfort comes a lot of cost because, again, you have to patch it. You have to reboot it. You have to make sure that you reboot it in such a time that it doesn't take down your customers and your end users. And that becomes a lot of heartache and anguish and energy that you're spending that's not adding value to the actual end user themselves. So if you do lift and shift into IaaS, by all means, take that as a very first step. you need to start figuring out how you modernize that application, how you actually take down and break apart that monolith, how you start to use some of the PaaS services. I will sit here right now and tell you I do a lot of things with Kubernetes, but app service in Azure is still hands down my favorite service that we have ever produced ever. I don't have to containerize anything. I can take my app right out of IIS that's running on a VM, put it inside of app service, and instantly never have to reboot a machine again. Instantly be able to scale out on load, be able to do canary deployments, be able to do blue-green deployments, being able to do zero downtime deployments, all using something as simple as app service. I can take a WAR file that was a Java application, put it in app service without changing a single thing, and it just works. And too many people think that they have to jump the shark like Fonzie on Happy Days, trying to figure out how do I take this app that has never been containerized, never needed to be containerized, and learn Docker, learn how to do registries, how to deploy an application from Docker, how to make sure I get all my environment set up, and then jump into Kubernetes and how do I do orchestration and how do I do ingress and how do I package my application. I'm like, why are you doing all of this stuff? Let's make sure that you use the tool to solve the problem. And there's lots of tools out there. Kubernetes is not the only tool. Docker is not the only tool. So make sure that when you're working with your customers, if they come to you and say, hey, we need to go to Docker, I don't want to back up and say, tell me what the problem is you're trying to solve, because that might not be the best solution for you. Are you already containerized? If not, why are we talking about going to Docker? Are you running on containers on-prem? No, we can run your app the exact way it is right now in the cloud and bring all these different benefits, reliability, consistency, observability without you having to containerize your app. Now, I'm not saying you should discourage people from containerizing their app if containerizing their app actually solves a problem for them. But think of Azure, GCP, AWS as just a toolbox. And that toolbox has tons of fantastic tools in it. And what I would encourage people to do is understand the problem, not the solution. When a customer comes to me and says, we want to go into Kubernetes, that to me is a solution, but you haven't explained to me the problem that you're trying to solve. So I try to take them back a step and say, let's talk about the actual motivation behind Kubernetes. And when I start to hear about what their problems are, I can then drive them towards the right direction. Maybe Kubernetes is the right answer for you. Like maybe you have all the problems that Kubernetes is designed to solve. Or maybe you have a simple application with a very low usage that just needs to be off the machine it's on right now and hosted somewhere inside of Azure. And we could do Azure Static Web Apps, App Service, container apps if you want to go that route. We could go Kubernetes, we could go Service Fabric, we could just go all these different places that we can go to get you hosted in the cloud in a way that allows you to take advantage and catch up to your competitors who might already be inside that environment. I just can't harp on that enough, because I can't tell you how many times I go to customers and have to unwind their architectural decisions, have to unwind these solutions that they dreamed up because they thought they had to be in the cloud because their competitors are in the cloud, and don't realize the tax that their competitors are paying by going to technology that they did not need to solve the problem that they currently had for their end users and their customers. And that's one of the things when I was talking to Willie about coming, is like, I really want to make sure people understand that I love Docker and I use it when it's appropriate, but you don't use it for every single solution that's out there. I know we're going to save 10 minutes at the end for questions, but I really would like this to be more interactive. I'm more than happy to answer more questions as we go. So I'll keep an eye on the chat, and definitely raise your hand and come off of mute whenever you have questions for me, because I think interactively, this is a lot more valuable. One of the things that we've also identified is that software has become a strategic advantage for people in every industry. Every industry that I visit, there's a group of people in who are writing software to make that life easier. Satya likes to say every company has become a software company. I used to say every company has software developers in it. I don't know if they say that they're a software company, but they definitely have software developers in there who are trying to make amazing things happen. And I think software is a huge enabler, as you are well aware, to help companies outpace their competition, but only when it's wielded correctly. And just get bogged down in technology for technology's sake is just a waste of time for a lot of people. So Daniel, looks like you have some questions already. Oh, you're muted right now.
There's always that one guy, right?
Always.
I was just calling out to the group, just if there was any questions, just to raise them, and I'll help field them for you and just wave to you that there's a question.
Sure. And we can just raise our hand using the reactions inside of Teams too, which is awesome. You also mentioned some things about the fact that I have a background in Scrum, which is interesting because today I'm helping 3 teams simultaneously adopt Scrum in Azure. in the Azure Incubations team. And it was funny because I have 5 monitors to the left of me, and 3 of them were me in meetings with these teams as they're going through their planning. And the reason that I bring that up is I am a firm believer that to benefit wholly from DevOps, you first have to be good at Agile. If you are not producing an increment of shippable software, you shipping it fast is not helping anybody, because crap shipped fast is still crap. You got to make sure you're building an increment of software that people actually want to use, and then using DevOps to make sure that we get that information to their customers as quickly as possible. All right, looks like you do have a question.
Yes, we have one question from Ivana. What were some of the challenges you've experienced when implementing DevOps in Microsoft?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. It runs the entire gambit, right? Some people have never done it, so they don't think they need to do it. If we've gotten this successful not doing this thing, and we're this $14 billion a year business, like, why do we need to go implement this new methodology or this new practice to implement DevOps? And it's the same answer that I gave to the airline earlier. It's because your competitors are. Yeah, you've grown to this size without having to do it. But the fact that your competitors are doing it is now making it a necessity for you, because what you did a decade ago will no longer be tolerated by our customers today. Our customers are expecting the code to be reliable, to be fast, and be constantly being updated. Think about the mobile phone, which I think is the most competitive landscape in the world. What I mean by that is every app on your phone probably has half a dozen or more apps that do the exact same app on your phone. So if you do not like or have any bad experience with the app that you're using today, you can simply uninstall it, give it a 1-star rating, and go get the competitor in minutes, because it just downloads over the air onto your phone, and go off and do something else. And that customer that you've lost is going to try every other app in the App Store that does the exact same thing that you do before it ever considers coming back to you. And depending on how bad the experience was with you during that experience, may never come back to you. They're expecting that constant update. They're expecting that constant innovation, and DevOps enables that for you. You cannot right-click and publish your way against someone who's actually doing DevOps best practices. You can't risk having a bad deployment and not having an unbreakable pipeline that has the telemetry being monitored as it's being deployed and being able to roll that back. Inside of Azure, we've had to do all that kind of stuff. So some of the impedance is they haven't ever done it, so they don't want to do it. The other one is feeling that they have to get permission to do it. And this is the one that will, like, there's a couple of times me getting recorded where I just lost it, where a customer, like, I'm at a big conference, I'm talking about DevOps, they're all excited, and someone raises their hand and says, Donovan, but how do I get permission to do this? And then I just lose it. And the reason that I lose it is because it's your job to do this. You don't go to your boss and say, should I use a for loop or use a while loop? You use the loop that's appropriate for the problem, because that's your job to know this. And to me, implementing CI, implementing CD, making sure you're writing unit tests, that's your job. You should not have to go ask permission to do the right thing for your company. So again, though, to answer your question, some of the things that we are stopping, not only here at Microsoft, but every customer that we have across the globe, is people having this so much pressure on them to continue to deliver that they don't feel that they have the right, the authority, or the time to say, we need to stop and start implementing continuous integration and continuous delivery, start writing unit tests, start scanning for our dependencies, so that we can continue to deliver at the demands that are going to be put upon us by our customers and by our competition. And I wish the reasons that we struggled were unique to Microsoft, but they're not. It's lack of time, lack of feeling of authority, and just the mindset that we've never done this stuff and we're successful, so we don't need to do this stuff going forward. And I'm sure if you've spoken to a lot of your customers, they've probably said the exact same thing to you on why they're not adopting DevOps right now. But just show them one of their competitors that has been updating their app every month, that has features that they're not going to have for years, because they're not deploying their stuff as easily as they are with DevOps. And that'll scare them into, oh my God, we got to figure this stuff out, or we're never going to be able to catch up.
Okay. Thank you for that question, Ivana. And we'll do one more question, and then we'll go back to your previous chat. So what are the best use cases for Docker containers where it doesn't make sense to have applications on containers? And this is coming from Rajesh.
So there's some really clever ways that you can use Docker containers. And the one that I liked the most is, if you've ever done integration testing is where the entire system is put together, and you're usually going to have some type of sample database. This is great for automated UI testing. All those automated UI tests assume that the data has a certain shape. There's 10 records in this table, 5 records in that table. These are the actual values in those tables. But after you run your integration test, after you run your automated UI test, that data is changing on the fly and you're validating it. But to run those tests again immediately means you have to first roll back your data set to that known set of assumptions when there's 10 rows in here, 5 rows in here, and these are those values. That can be very time consuming. Some of us have taken backups and then they'll basically restore the backup. Some of us write atomic tests, which are much harder to write, which is where I will assume the data is a certain way. I will verify that it is. I will run my test. And when I'm done running my test, I put everything back the way it was before, right? But those tests are harder to write and they can sometimes be error prone. Docker, on the other hand, changes all that stuff. I can actually build a Docker container that actually has the data in it the way that I want it to be in there, because you can run SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, all sorts of MongoDB inside of a Docker container. And I have the data set up the way that I want to, I simply spin up the container, run my integration test, run my automated UI test, and then I just simply fire up another container. That other container has all the data the exact way that I need it, so that I can then run my test again really, really quickly. So being able to use Docker for those temporary environments that have to have these certain sets of criteria before you start to use them is fantastic for that kind of stuff. So I was a big fan when I got that use case presented to me. It blew open the way that I think about Docker and containers. It's no longer just about running a microservice inside of a Kubernetes cluster in production. It's about making your everyday F5 experience easier, because now I have a data set that I can use, throw away, spin it up again, and it's the exact same data set that I need so I can run that test again. I use Docker containers with GitHub Codespaces. I don't know if you're familiar with GitHub Codespaces. I am an enormous fan of GitHub Codespaces. This allows me to define a Docker file or even a Docker image that I'm hosting somewhere and spin it up and then start deving inside this image, because it already has Truffle installed. It already has Solidity installed if you're doing .NET development, or I'm sorry, if you're doing Web3 development. And this made me really, really popular at Microsoft. We're obviously investigating Web3 like everyone else. I started playing with Truffle, Hard Hat, Brownie, Ganache, and all the other crazy names that are inside of Web3. Setting that stuff up is really, really, really painful, especially if you've never done it before. And I was doubting myself, thinking, is this hard because I just don't know Web3? Or but this shouldn't be this hard. I've been writing software since 1996. I live in Houston and I live right down the street from Compaq. There's no way this should be this hard for me. So what did I do? I built a Docker container that already installed Truffle, Hard Hat, Brownie, Ganache, Solidity, 2 different versions of Viper, all perfectly configured. So if you want to get started with Web3 development, you can actually create a dev container in Docker and everything's installed and ready to go. You just start typing your Truffle commands and you are now being able to do smart contract development instantly. So again, using a Docker container as a development environment, using a Docker container as a temporary test harness environment is fantastic. Now, there are also great environments where you just need to run it in production. You're running inside of Kubernetes. It has the ability to kill one and start up another one. You're able to burst out using things like Kata that also came from the team that I'm on. Kata is an event-driven autoscaler inside of Kubernetes that allows you to scale down your instances to 0, which you normally cannot do. And then it'll watch something like an event queue. And as the event queue starts to get items inside of it, Kata will wake up and say, oh, I need to start spinning up these pods inside of Kubernetes for you to go handle that data for you. And as soon as that queue gets emptied out, Kata will start spinning down those things for you again. Great use case for containers. Makes perfect sense. Another cool thing about using Kubernetes for containers is build agents. I'm a huge fan of Azure DevOps. I still love Azure DevOps. I'm really glad we're going to start reinvesting in Azure DevOps a lot more aggressively than we have been in the past. But you can also have your own custom build agent, and you can containerize that build agent and then scale them out inside of Kubernetes, do all these crazy builds, and then scale them back down again. So those are some examples of really good use cases that I found for using containers besides the canonical microservice inside Kubernetes thing. F5 experiences, testing data, great dev environment. Some reasons I would not use containers is simply apps that don't need all the complexity that comes with containers. First of all, you have to learn Docker. A lot of us who already know Docker don't remember how painful it was to learn Docker for the first time. And I know Docker, and I still fight with Docker files all day long to where all of a sudden something didn't get installed right, or I needed to sudo that command, or now my images are too fat because I put too much in one layer, or should I actually use multiple layers so I can download them in parallel versus this one big monolithic layer? There's all these different decisions that you have to decide and understand when you're actually doing Docker. So why would I add that complication on a team that is not benefiting from any of the things that come from actual Dockerizing or containerizing your application. So I look at it on a case-by-case basis, and I ask myself, what is the easiest way for me to solve the problem? Not just put them on the latest tech for the fact of putting them on the latest tech, but what is the problem that this customer is having? And what is the best solution inside of our cloud that offers that for them? And honestly, the first place I look is, can I solve this with app service? It is simply low-hanging fruit. It's extremely easy to use. It's highly flexible and powerful. And they will have to learn 0 new things, because they will take their app as it sits on their server today and simply move that app into app service, and it will simply run. Why am I going to go have to learn all this other stuff just to go ahead and put it in there? So could you put everything in a container? Sure you could. Should you put everything in a container? I would say absolutely not. That's simply a problem. You're causing more complication and problem to a solution that didn't need it, would be my point there as well.
Okay. Thank you.
There's a question that just popped up that I kind of want to answer. It's like, okay, how can we resolve the issue with constant patching for container images? That's interesting. I'm trying to remember how much. So again, the team that I work on is called Azure Incubations. We work on a lot of stuff that's not out yet. We built Dapper, we built Kata, and we're building some other stuff that I can't quite talk about yet. And one of them is about this problem. Is the reason that I kind of wanted to answer this question is because we're addressing this exact thing. When we're looking at problems like the log4j issue, how do we go back and patch all these questions really quickly, or all these images really quickly, and push out those changes without having to update through CI/CD, which sometimes can be a little bit of an impediment. So we have something coming for that. But another answer for you that I would give you is look at things, if you're not familiar already with, like Twistlock, Aqua. These are tools that you can use to scan your images inside your CI/CD pipeline and alert you to the fact that those need to be patched. And this is exactly what you need to patch those. So it's not you saying, oh, I have a vulnerability. Now let me go do all this research to figure out how I patch that vulnerability. It's like, no, just update your base image to this base image and that problem goes away. So it speeds you up a little bit. Another thing that I've heard rumors about, and I don't know, I think it's public, is that things like, don't get me in trouble, but Chris, we're going to post this on YouTube. Can I say what I'm about to say then? I'm trying to think about the fact that since we're going to post this on YouTube, can I say what I'm about to say? But I think it's public. It's public. Okay, I think I might risk it though. So there is a ACR task is another great way of doing it as well. But there, if you guys are familiar with Dependabot will search your code and say, hey, look, your code has all these problems, and here's a PR, here's an actual pull request that says, if you just simply accept my pull request, I've already updated your package.js. I've already updated your CS proj file with the latest versions or the correct versions of all those packages for you so that your code is automatically fixed. Well, we're going to start doing that for Docker as well. So it'd be like, hey, accept this PR. I've already updated your Docker file to the proper base image that you need. Just accept this PR and we'll merge it into it, and it'll automatically go out into your CI/CD pipeline with the appropriate patches on there. So those are my recommendations. One, Dependabot's on its way to do that. We have Twistlock, Aqua, and some other solutions that will alert you to the fact that you have a vulnerability in your Docker image and how to patch it. And then there's a project I know I can't talk about yet inside of the Azure Incubations team that's going to try to make that a lot easier and does work with ACR. It will work with ACR out of the box.
All right.
So if you have more questions, I'm more than happy to keep answering the questions.
We've got plenty of questions, but did you want to continue with your presentation?
No, because me getting through your questions is more important than me rambling on about some stuff like that. So this is more fun for me anyway.
All right, so we're going to jump a little bit back to Jason Bellis. He's curious, how does Donovan define cloud native applications? And how does cloud native relate to containerization or microservices, if at all?
That's a really good question. And a lot of people do assume that cloud native means it's containerized. I don't go that far. Cloud native to me means the solution was born in the cloud and designed to take advantage of all the things that being in the cloud allow you. The reliability, the scalability, that is what I think is being cloud native. Because if you were to just take an app that used to run inside of IIS, some of those simply don't want to be in the cloud. They're using session state, in proc session state. That doesn't really work very well in the cloud, right? Because what ends up happening is that you have 10 of these now running, and 10 of them there's no telling which one of them you're going to hit when you go back to see the contents of your cart. But because you're using session state that's in proc, you have to hit the exact same instance. Otherwise, your cart gets emptied. You had to externalize and think about the fact that I could have 100 of these, and that state needs to be put somewhere central like Cosmos DB or State Store, thinking of something like Redis Cache, to where that doesn't matter which one of these instances I hit again, that cookie is going to tell you exactly who I am so that you can go get my state and I can actually see that. That's being cloud native to me, is that I thought about and I'm utilizing all the things that the cloud offers me when I'm designing the solution. I never lived on-prem. I was born in the cloud, and I leveraged all the things the cloud has to bring to it. Now, microservices are obviously almost synonymous with cloud native, right? Because it's kind of hard to think about running them. Even though you can run your own cluster, you can run your own Kubernetes cluster on-prem. So like you could definitely do it. But most of us assume that if you're writing a microservice application today, you're probably going to be doing it in something like EKG or AKS or EKS, whatever the other people's Kubernetes services are in the other clouds, is the natural place that most people are going to run those. Because when you're thinking about microservices, you're thinking about scalability. You're wanting to be able to scale up one portion of your application without scaling up the other portion of your application, and containers allow you to do that really easily. I think it would be cumbersome to try to do that with app service. But app service is great for that one single application that just needs to scale, but it's not interacting with all these different microservices all the time. But we also have Azure Functions that I would say are definitely a cloud native concept, because until we put it in containers, you couldn't do that anywhere else except inside of the cloud. But I hope that answers your question. For me, cloud native is not just containers. It's about utilizing the cloud and all the things that being in the cloud bring to the table to your solution.
Okay.
If I didn't answer your question, please send me a follow-up.
Jason, are you good with that one?
No, that's perfect. Thanks, Donovan.
Sure.
Awesome. All right. So we have a question from Percy and related to Power Platform. Can Docker containers be applied to Power App Canvas app and Dataverse development?
Oh, that I do not know. I don't do a lot with Power Apps yet, but I intend to invest a lot more. And the reason why, and actually you're going to hear me talk about this some at Ignite, is that a lot of people think of Power Apps, and you might have heard this term called citizen developer, which I'm not a big fan of. And it's like, hey, no code, low code, citizen developer. I'm like, no, if you're solving solutions with a computer, you're a developer. Like, I don't know why we choose to separate us as pro dev versus citizen dev versus hobby dev. No, if you're singing code and you're solving problems, we're all developers. And again, goes back to my whole tool thing. I actually want to start investing more of my own education in sharpening that knife when it comes to different areas of Microsoft. And that's one of the areas that I don't know a lot about, but I've played with it just enough to know that like there's some cool stuff over there that prevents me as a developer from having to write more code than I have to write. And that's the bottom line. I can be more productive by writing less lines of code, because every line of code I write, I can mess up. Every line of code I write, I have to test, right? So if I could actually write less code and get that mobile app created or that Windows 10 front end created for me, but then I only have to write the back end services, why would I not do that? Why am I over here writing my own front end and mobile and my own front end for Windows and my own front end for Mac, my own front end for Android, when I can use a platform that basically just automates all that for me, then I get to focus just on that logic that makes my project special. So I don't know the answer to your question, but it is something that I will be investigating a lot more in, because I think Power Apps and the low code, no code is something that every developer needs to be investigating in. And we don't need to say, oh, pro devs shouldn't be using that. Yeah, we should. We should be using the right tool for the right job. And I'm realizing very quickly how powerful that stuff is and how I can start to utilize it in my day-to-day programming as well.
Excellent. Great question there, Percy. Thank you very much. All right. And another question from Kevin. We're in the process of looking at implementing Azure repo integrations for white source/mend, which will do that dependabot function. Or that's a comment, sorry.
Yeah, white source is great. I've been working with white source for a long time. They had a Bolt plugin for Azure DevOps like really, really early on. I'm thinking 2015, 16 timeframe. I remember working with them. And I still work with them quite a bit. So white source is a great partner of ours. They have a lot of great solutions so that you can definitely do that scanning in your repo. But white source Bolt should automatically work. Maybe you're talking about a different white source product that I'm not familiar with yet.
Yeah, we actually have the, I guess you call it the full version of white source, which has its own SaaS panel and integration. it does a lot, like it's a lot more full feature with the single pane of glass management console and reporting
Gotcha.
tool for that. And it does a lot of integrations it has, such as it actually does sandbox DLL execution to see if exploitable code is actually there.
Yeah.
Which is very cool.
Yeah. I remember they showed me that one cool
Yes.
thing where there's like, hey, Donovan, you have this vulnerability, but don't worry, none of your code calls it. I'm like, that's freaking awesome, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so now I don't have to freak out. Exactly.
Yeah, so we're starting, the support for that's very limited, but obviously it supports .NET DLLs, which is obviously a big one for us. We're doing that, and the Azure Repos integration is still in a beta public preview phase, but it literally is that exact thing you mentioned and outlined, the dependent bot functionality. But at the same time, it also calls and reports into the centralized console. So like it's quite powerful to be able to do that, and you can see reports right in the CI/CD pages that are linked to the central white source console. So it's very cool. But yes, we're in the process of looking at that.
Oh, very, very cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's very cool stuff. And a lot of the stuff that's inside of advanced security, I think you're going to see that making its way into other parts of Microsoft as well. I'll just leave it at that.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I'm trying to walk that line of what I can and can't say. I want to share as much as I can, but I also don't want to, like, Donovan was released from Microsoft for sharing. Like,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Totally. Yeah.
All right, we have one more question here in the chat from Roy. When you mention sudo in containers, do you prefer Linux containers?
Yes, and the only reason is because they're so freaking small, right? So I am not a Linux person. The first time I installed Linux, this is really weird. Every time I say this, it seems so odd. So I joined Microsoft in December 2013, and in 2014 was the first time I ever installed Linux after I joined Microsoft. Like, how weird is that to join Microsoft and then start installing Linux for like a daily basis? I was doing it a lot, and the reason why is because we were trying to push really hard for VSTS at the time to actually work on Linux, and who had an open source build agent that had to work on Linux. So I started getting really familiar with Linux. And then as Docker started to become more and more popular, originally all of the Docker containers were originally just Linux, right? So the tooling is better, the experience. If you're going to Google something to figure out like how to do it, like the answer is probably going to be on some base of Ubuntu or Alpine. So like just the volume of data that you have for working with Linux containers today just dwarfs that for working on Windows containers. And Windows containers are still just a little heavy, right? They're just big, right? And they're working to get them down and smaller. But if you were to compare the same image trying to run something as simple as a .NET Core application, like why in the world am I bringing all the way to Windows to run a .NET Core application that I can easily run on a Linux container? So Linux is something it's a necessary evil for me to understand how to build these images. And the more, just like anything else, the more I do it, the more comfortable that I get. I actually have a laptop somewhere running Ubuntu desktop on it so I can get familiar. And it's really cool because if you go from Windows to Linux, all your keyboard shortcuts work. I also have a Mac somewhere in here. I hate it. I cannot stand my Mac because none of my keyboard shortcuts work. I don't know what Alt means. I don't know what Option means, like these weird buttons on there. I can't stand my Mac. But I love my Linux machine because everything that I do naturally simply just works on my Linux machine. So I'm becoming a fan of Linux. My daily driver is obviously a Windows machine, but for development, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing right now is on Linux, and I default to .NET 6 now, which is also cross-platform, and I was doing a lot of .NET 3.1 or Core before that, just to force me to get familiar with Linux, because again, the containers, the speed, and the knowledge is just so vast.
All right, and we have 5 minutes left, but another question from Dimitri. How to be more independent from the cloud infrastructure and be ready to easily move AWS, Azure/Google. Is it a good idea at all?
Dapper. It's the answer. Like, go find my videos on Dapper. Like, Dapper is that way that frees you from your cloud implementation. So Dapper, which is a distributed runtime that we produced in the team that I work on, allows you to develop locally on your machine using like Redis containers. But the abstraction layer that we give you, you have no idea if you're talking to Redis or Cosmos DB or DynamoDB or something inside of GCP. Your code has no idea. It just says, I have this data, go store it for me. Now give me my data back. And all the magic behind the scenes happens for you thanks to Dapper. And what Dapper has are these configuration files. And you configure it and say, I have something called a state store. And the state store points at Redis. And you can say, I have something called a state store. That part can't change. It's still called a state store, but now it's pointing at Azure storage. So my code just says there's something called state store, and I want you to put this data in it. And Dapper will put it in there for you. Now give me my data back, and Dapper will give it back. It also does pub sub, secrets management, service to service invocation. What else? Bindings, input and output bindings. So I can say every time a tweet comes in that has the word Microsoft in it, I want you to alert my code. My code is just a post request inside of a web service, has no idea Dapper exists, has no idea how it gets this data. It's just sitting there, and every single time a tweet happens with the word Microsoft, that code gets called and it hands the tweet to that particular piece of code. And I have no idea how any of that magic stuff happens. So Dapper is the answer to, I want to have a great isolated experience. I want that F5 experience to be magic on my dev machine. And I'm going to do that by running local Docker containers that might have things like Redis or Azure SQL, or you can have SQL Server running in there now, Mongo, whatever it is that you're running locally for your development experience. And then when you take your code and you deploy it into production, all the configuration will say, now you're pointing at Azure, or now you're pointing at AWS, or now you're pointing at GCP, and your app is none the wiser that that it's been moved from your dev machine into the cloud, in any cloud that you want. It also works on the edge, which means you can run this inside of Kubernetes that is running detached. And I mean way on the edge. The last place that we deployed Dapper was on the International Space Station. So we actually have Dapper running in space right now, doing all the same stuff that I just promised you could do on-prem. So the answer is Dapper. It was the first project I worked on when I got to this team, and it really made me glad I was on a team that could build something that freaking cool. I have some videos on it on YouTube. So if you just search Donovan Brown Dapper, you'll see a lot of the getting started videos that I've done, how to set it up. And these are short videos because it's so easy to use. I'm talking 7 minutes maximum video to get you pub sub, state management, secrets management, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, thank you, Dimitri. And we have 2 more minutes. Last question from Kevin. Real question this time. How do you balance the need for security controls and auditability with the continual push for faster and faster releasing?
Great. So I'm sounding a little bit like a broken record, but again, things like Dapper have all the security and best practices built into the actual abstractions themselves. So as a developer, I'm not having to go back and become a security expert. We're also working on a project called Radius, which I can talk about. It just got a private release. Even when you're setting up the infrastructure in your cloud of choice, they're making sure that all the security best practices are actually built into the way that your infrastructure is deployed. And if you're doing something careless, the deployment will actually tell you, hey, like, you shouldn't be doing this, you need to be doing X. So it's really cool to be able to have the developer focus on adding value and having the tooling that we use, be it Dapper or Radius, and even things like Azure Monitor and Azure Security Center, tell you when you're doing things that are wrong and even teach you how to harden those things. I remember I was doing a demo of security management, and I purposely put a vulnerability. I went to my security dashboards like, Donovan, you need to click this button so I can go fix this problem that you just pushed into production. Right? It was kind of cool how the tools are trying to make sure that security isn't an afterthought, because security is everyone's responsibility. But what we're trying to do is enable the tools to do the right thing on the behalf of the developer.
Okay.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah,
Excellent. Sure. Well, we're out of time for today. So thank you so much, Donovan. It's been a pleasure having you here with us today. But this is not the end. Upcoming at the next Vancouver DevOps on September 27th, we'll have a chance for more Q&A with Donovan. So there's a part 2. So if you have any questions between now and then, there'll be opportunity to ask. Absolutely. So thank you again, Donovan. Big round of applause. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks, Willie, for the invite. I hope this was helpful, and I hope to see everyone on the 27th.
Thank you, Donovan.
Thank you
very much, Donovan.
All right, bye-bye.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
Really great.
Thank you.